The Recovery Kernel. Substance-Specific Navigation Series. How to recover from crack cocaine. Using the Recovery Kernel Framework. Crack, freebase, rock, stone, base, glass, hubbub, ready, rock. Warning: harm reduction resource, not medical advice. Crisis, call 911 or text 988. Crack cocaine causes heart attacks, strokes, and sudden pulmonary crisis, at any age. Chest pain, severe shortness of breath, or coughing blood after smoking, call 911 immediately. A note before you begin. The Recovery Kernel series has a guide for powder cocaine. This is not that guide. The pharmacology is the same. Crack cocaine is freebase cocaine, which is the same molecule, cocaine hydrochloride, processed into a form that can be smoked. The DAT/CERT/NET triple reuptake blockade, the dopamine flooding, the warrior COMT constitutional profile, the cardiovascular risks, all of it applies. The cocaine guide covers the biology in full, and this guide cross-references it without repeating every element. What this guide addresses is what is different. And what is different is significant enough to require its own guide. The route of administration changes everything. When crack cocaine is smoked, it reaches the brain in approximately 8 seconds. The effect peaks in under a minute and substantially clears in 10 to 15 minutes. This is the fastest brain delivery of any cocaine administration route. The resulting pharmacokinetic profile, extreme peak, very short duration, precipitous drop, produces the most intense binge pattern, the most severe crash, and the most powerful craving architecture of any substance in this guide series. The rush of smoked crack is qualitatively different from the elevation of intranasal cocaine, more sudden, more total, and more specifically remembered. The memory of it is what drives the return. The pulmonary consequences are unique to this route. Lungs were not built to process vaporized cocaine alkaloid. Crack lung, bronchospasm, chronic respiratory disease, and hemoptysis are specific to smoking and do not appear in the intranasal or oral cocaine profiles. And then there is what the compendium names directly in its historical timeline: drug policy responses criminalized crack at 100 to 1 sentencing disparity versus powder cocaine, disproportionate incarceration of black communities, treatment infrastructure absent, punishment substituted for medicine. This sentence is the moral context of this guide. Many people reading it have been touched by the crack epidemic not only through their own use but through incarceration, their own, a parents, a siblings, and through the structural aftermath that incarceration produces: criminal records, barriers to housing and employment, family rupture, and community surveillance. The recovery this guide supports must be capable of operating in that context, not beside it. This guide holds the pharmacology and the politics simultaneously. Because the person who has both survived crack cocaine use and survived what the criminal justice system did with the crack epidemic deserves a framework that sees the whole picture. Section 0, Immediate Safety, read this first. Warning: crack cocaine causes cardiac and pulmonary emergencies. Chest pain, severe shortness of breath, or blood in sputum after smoking, call 911 immediately. Do not wait. The cardiac emergency. Crack cocaine's cardiac danger is the same as powder cocaine: coronary vasospasm, norepinephrine surge, platelet aggregation, but amplified by the speed and intensity of the smoke delivery. The sudden, massive sympathetic activation of crack smoking can produce cardiac arrhythmia, myocardial infarction, and sudden cardiac death within minutes of a single hit, in people of any age with no prior cardiac history. Chest pain, pressure, or tightness, during or after smoking, call 911. Do not wait to see if it passes. Jaw pain, left arm pain, or back pain during or after smoking, cardiac emergency. Call 911. Sudden severe pounding heartbeat with dizziness or near fainting, possible arrhythmia. Call 911. Sudden severe headache, possible hemorrhagic stroke. Call 911 immediately. There is no reversal agent for cocaine cardiovascular emergencies. Treatment is supportive, managing the vasospasm, arrhythmia, and sympathetic overdrive while the cocaine clears. Time and emergency care are the treatment. The pulmonary emergency, cracked lung. Classical building the centurion, the lungs were not built for this, the crack-specific pulmonary crisis. Cracked lung, diffuse alveolar hemorrhage, is a specific and potentially fatal pulmonary emergency that occurs with smoked cocaine and does not occur with intranasal or oral cocaine. The hot cocaine vapor directly injures the lung's alveolar tissue, producing hemorrhage into the air spaces, respiratory failure, and, in severe cases, death. Warning: call 911 immediately for any of the following after smoking crack: coughing up blood or blood-tinged sputum. Severe shortness of breath at rest. Rapid breathing with inability to get adequate air. Bluish coloring of lips or fingernails. These are signs of life-threatening pulmonary emergency. Overdose recognition in the crack context. Crack cocaine overdose presents primarily through cardiovascular and neurological events, but the specific crack context adds features that distinguish it from powder cocaine overdose. Hyperthermia. Crack's intense sympathetic activation combined with physical activity can rapidly elevate body temperature to dangerous levels. Very hot, flushed, no longer sweating, 911 and cooling measures. Seizure, both from cocaine neurotoxicity and from the hyperthermia itself. Call 911. Recovery position. Do not restrain. Cocaine-induced psychosis, paranoid, extremely agitated, believing they are being followed or that people are trying to harm them. Remove from the environment to a calm, safe space. Call 911 if violence risk or severe disorientation. Overdose in the context of other substances. Crack combined with alcohol creates cocaethylene, more cardiac toxic than either alone. Crack combined with opioids or benzodiazepines. The stimulant may mask opioid sedation, carry naloxone. Combination overdose requires 911 regardless. Harm reduction for active smoking, safer crack use. Classical building the centurion, for people who are not yet ready to stop, reducing the harm that is happening now. This section is here because harm reduction saves lives even when recovery has not yet begun. The recovery kernel does not require abstinence before offering assistance. If someone is currently using crack and not yet ready to stop, the following harm reduction practices reduce the most acute risks. Glass pipes over improvised alternatives, brass chorboy, aluminum can, or plastic pipe smoking produces additional toxic exposure beyond the cocaine itself. Glass pipes with rubber mouthpieces reduce burns to lips and hands and eliminate metal or plastic combustion byproducts. Mouthpiece use. A rubber or silicone mouthpiece prevents direct hot glass contact with the lips, reducing the burns and cuts that create entry points for HIV and other blood-borne infections. Do not share pipes. The lip cuts and sores that develop with crack pipe use create blood-borne pathogen transmission risk equivalent to needle sharing. Do not share. Lip care. Vitamin E oil or petroleum jelly on lips and around the mouth reduces the cracking and sores that develop with chronic pipe use. Fentanyl test strips. Fentanyl has been found in crack cocaine supply. While crack is smoked rather than injected, fentanyl absorbed through pulmonary mucosa can produce respiratory depression. Test strips are available through harm reduction organizations. Never use alone. Crack's cardiac and pulmonary emergency risk is highest in the immediate smoking window. Having someone present who can call 911 is life-saving. Naloxone. If crack is being used alongside opioids, or if supply contamination is a concern, carry naloxone. It does not harm someone who has not taken opioids but can save the life of someone who has. Harm reduction kits for crack cocaine are available through local needle exchange programs and many public health departments in most major cities. These kits provide the materials above and are free. Section 1. What crack cocaine did to your brain. Classical building the centurion, same molecule, different delivery, how the route changes everything. Crack cocaine and powder cocaine share an identical pharmacological mechanism, simultaneous blockade of the dopamine transporter, DAT, serotonin transporter, SERT, and norepinephrine transporter, NET. The molecule is the same. What is different, dramatically, architecturally, clinically, is how that molecule reaches the brain. The cocaine guide in this series covers the core pharmacology, the triple reuptake inhibition, the warrior COMT profile, the cardiovascular mechanisms, the binge crash cycle, the genomic blueprint. Read it alongside this guide. The biology of crack cocaine addiction is the biology of cocaine addiction with one variable changed, and that one variable changes everything. 1.1 The route changes everything, the pharmacokinetics of crack. 1.2 The rush, the memory that drives the return. Classical building the centurion, the most specific and most powerful reinforcement memory in the stimulant category. The crack rush is not simply very good cocaine. It is a qualitatively distinct neurological event, the product of a bolus of cocaine arriving at the dopamine system in seconds, producing a sudden and overwhelming signal that the reward system has never encountered outside of the pipe. The neuroscience of why this matters: the reinforcement learning system encodes the magnitude and speed of reward. The faster and more intense the reward, the more deeply it is encoded and the more powerfully the cue that preceded it is associated with the anticipation of its return. The crack rush encodes at the maximum possible depth because it is the maximum possible speed and magnitude combination the system has experienced. This produces the specific craving architecture of crack recovery. The craving is not for cocaine in the abstract. It is for the rush specifically, the specific 10 to 20 second peak event whose memory is stored with exceptional vividness and whose associated cues fire with exceptional power. The cue that triggered the first hit before the first rush of a session fires this memory with the full intensity of the event itself. Understanding this is the foundation of the craving interrupt protocol in Section 5. You are not managing a vague urge. You are managing a precisely encoded memory of a specific neurological event, and the craving is the prediction of that event's return. 1.3 The crack binge, shorter cycles, more extreme consequences. Classical building the centurion, the 15-minute clock that runs the binge. The cocaine guide describes the binge crash cycle of powder cocaine. In crack, this cycle runs on a 10 to 15-minute timeline rather than a 20 to 30-minute one. The consequences of compressing the cycle. More doses per unit time, where an intranasal binge might involve 10 to 15 lines over several hours, a crack binge can involve 20 to 30 or more hits in the same period. More extreme dopamine depletion per session, more total doses means more total release and reuptake blockade, deeper D2 receptor downregulation, and a more severe post-binge crash. More money per session, the compulsion to redose every 10 to 15 minutes means far greater financial expenditure per binge than powder cocaine at equivalent street prices. More total cardiovascular stress, every hit produces a cardiovascular event, vasospasm, sympathetic activation, heart rate and blood pressure surge. 20 hits in a night is 20 cardiovascular events. More total pulmonary exposure, the lungs process every hit. More hits per session means more total alveolar exposure to hot cocaine vapor. The pipe scraping, when supply runs out at the end of a binge, the impulse to scrape residue from the inside of the pipe, burning or reburning material that was already partly combusted, is a specific feature of crack binges that compounds pulmonary toxicity. 1.4 The physical markers, what crack use leaves on the body. Unlike intranasal cocaine, which leaves nasal damage, or 4-cocaine, which leaves injection sites, smoked crack leaves its physical record in specific locations. Pipe burns, burns on the lips, fingertips, and the web of skin between thumb and forefinger from handling hot pipes. These are often dismissed but are both a physical harm and a cue. The healed burns become physical reminders with craving triggering potential. Chronic cough and dark sputum, the residue from crack combustion accumulates in the respiratory system, producing a characteristic productive cough with dark tinted sputum. Dental damage, crack cocaine's vasoconstriction reduces blood flow to the gum tissue and teeth. Combined with the dry mouth, bruxism, teeth grinding from stimulant effects, and poor nutrition during binge periods, dental damage is progressive. Weight loss, The appetite suppression of stimulant use is compounded by the financial priority of the drug over food during active use. Skin picking, formication, the tactile hallucination of coke bugs, the sensation of insects under the skin, is more common with crack than intranasal cocaine due to higher peak plasma levels. The resulting skin-picking lesions are both a physical harm and a cue in recovery. 1.5. The context, what the crack epidemic did beyond the pharmacology. Classical building the Centurion, the compendium names what the policy did, punishment was substituted for medicine. The Recovery Kernel Compendium's historical timeline names the crack cocaine epidemic in a sentence that contains an indictment. Drug policy responses criminalized crack at 100-to-1 sentencing disparity versus powder cocaine, disproportionate incarceration of black communities, treatment infrastructure absent, punishment substituted for medicine. This guide does not leave that sentence behind after Section 1. It runs through every section because its consequences run through every person who was part of the crack epidemic, whether they used crack themselves, had a family member incarcerated, grew up in a community disrupted by both the drug and the enforcement response, or spent years inside a system that said 5 grams of crack equals 500 grams of powder cocaine under the law. The Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 reduced the disparity from 100:1 to 18:1. The First Step Act of 2018 made this retroactive for some. Neither law has fully repaired what the disparity did. The barriers to recovery that the crack epidemic's criminal justice response created, records, restricted housing, restricted employment, interrupted family relationships, community-level trauma, are not historical. They are present in the lives of many people reading this guide. The Recovery Kernel's position, stated plainly, the dependency that developed was biology. What happened to many people as a consequence of the dependency was a policy choice. The biology required medicine. The policy chose incarceration. The person who developed crack cocaine use disorder did not fail. They were failed by a pharmacological trap that was allowed to flourish in communities already under structural pressure, and by a response that treated medicine as a crime. Recovery in this context is not simply stopping the drug. It is rebuilding a life in conditions that the drug, and the response to it, complicated in ways that are not solved by neurochemistry alone. This guide addresses both. Section 2, Your Genomic Blueprint. The genomic profile for crack cocaine recovery is identical to powder cocaine, because the pharmacological mechanism is identical. The compendium's powder cocaine guide covers the genomic panel in full detail, COMT, Val/Val Warrior Primary, DAT1/SLC6A3, DRD2/ANKK1, SLC6A4, MTHFR, DRD4, BDNF, CYP3A4. This section provides the crack-specific interpretation of those genes, what they mean when the route is smoked rather than insufflated. Crack-specific genomic considerations. Phenotyping in the crack context. Did crack feel like the first time everything was as it should be, intensity, aliveness, full signal? Classic Warrior COMT plus DRD2A1 double deficit profile. The biological basis of recovery architecture is clear. Did you use crack for focus or productivity before the dependence deepened? DAT110 repeat plus DRD47 repeat ADHD profile. ADHD evaluation is a recovery priority. Did the crash from crack feel more devastating than the crash from other stimulants you've used? This is the pharmacokinetic consequence of the higher peak. The warrior brain crashes harder from higher peaks. The proportionality is expected. Did you develop significant respiratory symptoms, chronic cough, shortness of breath, coughing blood, during heavy use? Pulmonary evaluation is a medical priority regardless of how much time has passed since last use. Do you have a family history of cardiac disease and were using crack heavily? Cardiovascular evaluation with ECG and cardiac enzyme testing is appropriate, particularly if any cardiac symptoms occurred during use. Section 3, The Crash, the most severe dopamine floor in the stimulant category. Classical building the Centurion, proportional to the peak, and the peak was total. Crack cocaine withdrawal, specifically the crash that follows a heavy smoking binge, is the most severe acute dopamine floor in the stimulant category. The principle is pharmacokinetic. The height of the dopamine peak determines the depth of the crash when the receptor blockade clears. Crack's peak is the highest of any cocaine administration route. The crash is correspondingly the deepest. The person who smoked heavily through the night enters the post-binge crash state, sometimes called the bottom in crack culture, in a state of neurobiological devastation that is qualitatively different from the cocaine come-down. The depression is total. The anhedonia is complete. The craving for the pipe is immediate and overwhelming. And the physical exhaustion of a night of cardiovascular stress, no food, no sleep, and constant sympathetic nervous system overdrive compounds everything. 3.1 The Post-Binge Crash Timeline. 3.2 Medical Assessment in Early Recovery. Unlike most stimulant recovery, crack cocaine recovery warrants specific medical assessment beyond the standard metabolic and cardiovascular evaluation because of the pulmonary route of administration. Pulmonary function testing, spirometry assesses lung capacity and the degree of airway damage from crack smoking. Establishes baseline. Some damage is reversible with cessation, understanding the extent motivates and guides recovery. Chest X-ray or CT, if any respiratory symptoms are present, imaging evaluates for residual crack lung injury, pneumothorax, or chronic pulmonary changes. Cardiac evaluation, ECG for arrhythmia or ischemia evidence, blood pressure assessment. Echocardiogram if any cardiac symptoms occurred during use. Levamisole assessment, CBC the same agranulocytosis risk from levamisole contaminated cocaine supply documented in the cocaine guide applies to crack, the powder cocaine from which crack is made carries the same contamination. Dental assessment, crack cocaine-associated dental damage is often severe and requires dental evaluation. Dental access is a barrier for many in the crack recovery population. Community health clinics and dental schools provide lower-cost options. Nutritional assessment, binge periods often involve severe nutritional neglect. Magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, and protein are the priority replenishments. Section 4, Biological Reconstruction. The Biological Reconstruction Protocol for crack cocaine is the Cocaine Guides Protocol, applied with adjustments for the more severe depletion profile of the smoked route. The deeper crash and more complete depletion require the same supplement foundation but with the understanding that recovery timelines may be longer and that the pulmonary system requires its own support. 4.1 The Methylation Foundation. From the Cocaine Guide, applied with crack-specific emphasis. 4.2 Dopamine Reconstruction, the primary recovery target. From the Cocaine Guide, full detail there, abbreviated and crack-adjusted here. L-tyrosine, 500 to 2000 mg, morning, away from protein dopamine precursor. The Warrior Brain Central Reconstruction Support. Start at 500 mg and titrate based on response and tolerance. Mucuna pruriens, 100 to 300 mg L-dopa equivalent, morning natural L-dopa. More direct and faster acting than tyrosine. Choose mucuna or tyrosine as primary, not both at maximum dose. Brain Stack, uridine, 250 to 500 mg, plus DHA, 1G, plus CDP choline, 250 mg D1/D2 receptor density upregulation. The most important structural recovery target, rebuilding the receptor density that the crack binge repeatedly hammered down. This takes weeks to months. Begin on day 1. NAC, 600 to 1800 mg daily, divided, with food glutamate homeostasis in the nucleus accumbens. Multiple clinical trials specifically in cocaine use disorder. Begin immediately. The compendive craving reduction evidence for NAC is the strongest of any supplement in this guide. Rhodiola rosea, 300 to 600 mg, morning dopamine modulation, adaptogen, anti-fatigue. Weeks 2 to 8 when the flatness is prominent but the precursor stack alone is not yet sufficient. 4.3 Serotonin reconstruction, the SERT component. Crack cocaine cert blockade depletes serotonin alongside dopamine, the same secondary reconstruction target as powder cocaine. The social ease and confidence of crack's initial effects included a serotonergic component that will be absent in recovery. 5-HTP, 50 to 150 mg, evening serotonin precursor. Supports mood and sleep simultaneously. Do not combine with SSRIs. Inositol, 4-12G, divided, titrate serotonin receptor sensitivity modulation. Anti-anxiety with evidence for OCD and compulsive elements, relevant to crack's compulsive craving architecture. Omega-3 EPA dominant, 2,4G daily EPA for mood, DHA for membrane fluidity and receptor function. Start immediately. 4.4, Pulmonary recovery support. Classical building the centurion, the lungs that absorbed every hit must also be rebuilt. Pulmonary recovery from crack smoking requires specific support beyond the standard cocaine recovery protocol. The lung is a direct primary target of crack's toxicity, unlike the nose, powder cocaine, or arm veins. For cocaine, the lung absorbed every hit directly. Pulmonary rehabilitation. If significant lung function impairment is identified on testing, formal pulmonary rehabilitation, supervised breathing exercises, aerobic conditioning, improves function and supports recovery. Available through hospital pulmonology departments and community health programs. 4.5, Sleep reconstruction in the crack context. Crack binges produce the most severe acute sleep deprivation of any cocaine pattern, 24 to 48-hour waking periods during binges, followed by crash hypersomnia, creating a severely disrupted circadian architecture. The sleep protocol is the same as the cocaine guides but with emphasis on the longer recovery timeline for severe disruption. Melatonin, 0.5 to 1 mg sublingual, 30 minutes before target sleep time. Circadian reset. Magnesium glycinate, 400 mg evening. GABA support, anxiety reduction for sleep onset. Glycin, 3,5G, 30 minutes before bed. Core body temperature reduction. 5-HTP, 50 mg evening. Serotonin-melatonin conversion. Epidolon, peptide, physician discussion pineal pathway and circadian normalization, particularly relevant for the extreme circadian disruption of crack binge crash cycles. The compendium stimulant withdrawal sonic protocol for sleep, delta binaural beats, 0.5 to 4 Hz, 60 to 70 BPM maximum, ambient, drone, warm acoustic textures. No sudden dynamics. Low volume. The crack-specific addition, avoid music with strong beat drops or tempo changes, these activate the associative arousal circuits that crack primed. 4.6, Peptide support layer. Section 5, the crack craving, understanding and interrupting. Classical building the centurion, the most specific and fastest firing craving in the stimulant category. Crack cocaine cravings have a specific character that distinguishes them even from powder cocaine cravings. They are faster, triggered in milliseconds by cues that the brain associates with the pipe. They are more specific, not a general dopamine want but a precise anticipatory prediction of the rush. And they carry a specific physical quality, a constriction in the chest, a rush of heat, an almost taste, that is the brain preloading the sensory experience it predicts is coming. The compendium's principle applies directly, my amygdala is generating a conditioned craving signal. Name it with clinical precision. The rush that the brain is predicting is a dopamine event, a specific, measurable neurological occurrence. The craving is the prediction. The interrupt is providing a counter-prediction before the first prediction completes. The crack-specific craving triggers. The crack craving interrupt, 5-minute protocol. Move first, think second. Before any cognitive processing, change your physical environment and position immediately. Walk away from whatever triggered the craving before executing any other step. The craving requires the cue environment. Remove yourself from it. High-intensity physical interrupt. The crack craving fires at maximum voltage, it requires a maximum intensity countersignal. Sprints, jumping jacks, push-ups, cold water on the face, anything that creates an overwhelming immediate physical sensation that competes with the craving signal. Not optional. Not too hard. Required. Execute 4-7-8 breathing, 6 cycles. The warrior brain that just experienced a full intensity rush prediction needs the vagal brake engaged. 6 cycles, not 4. The additional cycles matter for the intensity of the crack craving signal. Name it clinically. Say out loud or write, my dopamine anticipation circuit fired because, specific cue. This is a conditioned craving signal, not a command. The compendium's precision language principle, naming the mechanism interrupts the mythology. The craving is not the pipe calling. It is the amygdala generating a prediction. The prediction can be interrupted. Take NAC and tyrosine. The glutamate homeostasis, NAC, and dopamine precursor, tyrosine, address the neurochemical urgency. The craving has a biological substrate. The supplement addresses it directly. Contact. One call or text to your support structure. Name what triggered it. Name what you are doing. Connection is the countersubstance, the social dopamine signal that partially interrupts the crack craving circuit. You do not need rescue. You need signal. Execute your highest intensity natural reward. From Section 6, vigorous exercise, competition, creative work, cold exposure, anything genuinely intense. The warrior craving requires a real intensity response. Inadequate natural reward does not meet the threshold. It must be real. Section 6, porting the addiction, the warrior's intensity architecture. Classical building the centurion, the engine that chased the pipe is the same engine that wins anything it points at. The cocaine guide says it for the warrior, and it applies here with even more direct force. The crack cocaine user was not looking for a gentle enhancement. They were looking for a signal loud enough to break through the silence that the warrior baseline produces. The rush was the loudest signal available. The recovery is finding signals that are loud enough to matter, to actually reach the threshold of a nervous system that cleared dopamine before most substances could generate it, through means that do not also destroy the lungs and the heart. The Compendium Centurion Paper C-28 applied to crack recovery. The Olympian of nothing who spent nights in the pipe's orbit is the same person who, with the right address, would pursue mastery with exactly that intensity. The chase instinct does not go away. The pipe did not create it. Recovery is finding what the chase was always for. The natural intensity architecture, what meets the warrior threshold. Section 7, Navigating the Recovery Kernel, your protocol map. The crack cocaine recovery protocol map is the cocaine protocol map with specific additions for the pulmonary dimension, the criminal justice barrier management, and the more extreme binge crash recovery timeline. Section 8, the medical and systemic context. 8.1, medical priorities specific to crack. Pulmonary function testing, spirometry at baseline, 3 months, and 6 months. Understanding the trajectory, whether lung function is improving, stable, or declining, informs both clinical management and recovery motivation. Cardiovascular, ECG, blood pressure monitoring, cardiac enzyme testing if any symptoms occurred during use. Echocardiogram for significant use history or any symptoms. Levamisole, CBC at baseline and 1 and 3 months. The agranulocytosis risk from levamisole-contaminated cocaine supply is present for crack users because crack is made from the same powder supply. Dental, comprehensive dental assessment. Crack cocaine dental damage can be severe. Community health centers, dental schools, and sliding-scale dental practices provide options when cost is a barrier. Nutritional status, protein, magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, vitamin C assessment. Binge periods typically involve severe nutritional neglect. Nutritional repletion supports every other recovery system. Reproductive health, for women, crack cocaine use during pregnancy is associated with adverse neonatal outcomes. If pregnancy is possible, prenatal care and obstetric support should be arranged early. 8.2 Navigating the criminal justice system in recovery. Classical building the centurion, the system that chose punishment owes you nothing, but some of its tools are now recovery resources. For people whose crack cocaine use disorder intersected with the criminal justice system, through arrest, prosecution, incarceration, or ongoing probation and parole supervision, the legal landscape is part of the recovery landscape. This section provides the navigation framework. Drug court. Many jurisdictions offer drug court as an alternative to incarceration for drug-related offenses. Drug court programs typically involve frequent court appearances, drug testing, treatment participation, and graduated sanctions and rewards based on compliance. Completion of drug court typically results in reduced or dismissed charges. Drug court is simultaneously a legal requirement and a recovery support structure. The accountability it provides can be genuinely useful, not merely punitive. Probation and parole compliance. Drug testing in probation and parole creates accountability that, framed correctly, supports recovery rather than simply punishing use. Inform your probation or parole officer of your recovery engagement. Treatment participation, medical appointments, and support group attendance are typically viewed favorably and may provide flexibility within the supervision structure. Expungement eligibility. The First Step Act of 2018 made the reduced crack powder sentencing disparity retroactive for some federal convictions. State expungement laws vary significantly. Legal aid organizations and public defenders can assess whether prior convictions are eligible for sentence reduction, expungement, or sealing, which affects housing applications, employment background checks, and access to education. Housing with a record. Criminal records create barriers to many conventional housing programs. Fair chance housing ordinances, passed in several major cities, restrict landlord use of criminal records in housing decisions. Section 8 housing vouchers and HUD public housing policies have their own criminal record restrictions. Legal aid can advise on eligibility. Recovery residences, sober living homes, typically accept people with criminal records and provide housing support specific to recovery. Employment with a record, ban-the-box laws, passed in many states, restrict employers from asking about criminal history on initial job applications, creating a fairer opportunity to demonstrate qualifications before the record is disclosed. Second chance employment programs specifically serve people with criminal records. Vocational rehabilitation services, job training programs, and workforce development centers are available in most metropolitan areas. 8.3 Medications for crack cocaine recovery. Same as powder cocaine, no FDA-approved medication specifically for crack or cocaine use disorder. The emerging options. Bupropion, Wellbutrin dopamine and norepinephrine reuptake inhibition, evidence for cocaine craving reduction, addresses the depression component. CYP2B6 metabolized, slow metabolizers accumulate at higher levels. Modafinil/armodafinil, wakefulness agent with DAT modulating properties, evidence for cocaine craving and cognitive recovery, non-stimulant with low abuse liability. Naltrexone, modest evidence for crack craving reduction through opioid system modulation, more evidence for alcohol co-use disorder, OPRM1A118G variant shows strongest response. GLP-1 agonists, semaglutide, tirzepatide emerging data for cocaine use disorder through reward circuit dampening. The most promising emerging pharmacological option. Discuss with physician. Non-stimulant ADHD treatment, atomoxetine, guanfacine, viloxazine if ADHD co-occurs, addresses the DAT1/DRD4 deficit that crack was self-medicating. One of the most clinically impactful medical interventions when ADHD is confirmed. 8.4 Community resources specific to crack recovery. Crack Cocaine Anonymous, CA meetings provide peer support from people who specifically understand crack cocaine use disorder. Find meetings at ca.org. Smart Recovery, evidence-based, non-12-step alternative. Tools for managing cravings, building motivation, and addressing the cognitive dimensions of recovery. Meetings available online and in person. Harm reduction organizations, local needle exchanges and harm reduction programs typically provide crack pipe kits, naloxone, STI testing, and navigation to treatment services without judgment. Re-entry programs, for people leaving incarceration, re-entry programs provide housing navigation, employment assistance, legal aid, and treatment connection. National Reentry Resource Center, nationalreentryresourcecenter.org, provides state-by-state resources. Crisis, 988, Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, 911 for medical emergencies SAMHSA 1-800-662-4357. A final word. Classical building the centurion, the punishment was not what you needed. This is. The compendium's historical timeline names what happened plainly. Drug policy responses criminalized crack at 100-to-1 sentencing disparity versus powder cocaine, disproportionate incarceration of black communities, treatment infrastructure absent, punishment substituted for medicine. The person reading this guide may have experienced that substitution directly, as incarceration, as a criminal record that followed them through housing applications and employment interviews, as a parent taken from the home by the criminal justice response to a biological dependency, as a community that watched punishment deployed while medicine was absent. The recovery kernel was built for the people who ran out of time before anyone told them their biology was not their weakness. In the crack cocaine population, whose epidemic was met with a law enforcement response that produced the largest incarceration boom in American history while treating centers stood empty, the people who ran out of time were failed at every level, by the pharmacological trap that exploitation and structural poverty made available, by the policy that chose incarceration over treatment, and by a cultural narrative that called the resulting dependency a moral failure rather than what it was. The biology was never a moral failure. The triple reuptake inhibition that crack cocaine produced was a pharmacological event in a nervous system that the compendium's constitution framework identifies as the warrior profile, a brain that was always going to be drawn toward maximum intensity, that was always going to find the pipe signal louder than anything available elsewhere, because the warrior baseline genuinely required something louder than ordinary life provides. The crack was the loudest available signal. The recovery is finding what the warrior brain was always genuinely capable of producing on its own terms, and building the conditions in which that capacity is legible without the pipe. Every mile run. Every dollar saved. Every person served who was where you were. Every meal cooked. Every child tucked in. Every day sober in the city that sold you the pipe. These are genuine neurological events, dopamine signals, earned rather than stolen, building rather than depleting. The engine that chased crack through the night is the same engine that wins anything it commits to. The chase instinct does not go away in recovery. It finds an address the pipe could never provide, a life that actually grows. This guide was written for you. So was everything the Recovery Kernel Compendium contains. You are not its afterthought. You are the reason it was built. Drug Court Resources, nadcp.org Reentry Resources, National Reentry Resource Center.org Crack Cocaine Anonymous, ca.org. Refer to the Recovery Kernel Complete Centurion Compendium for all referenced protocols. Crisis, call or text 988 Emergency, 911 SAMHSA, 1-800-662-4357. Warning: harm reduction resource, not medical advice. How to recover from crack cocaine using the Recovery Kernel Substance-Specific Navigation Series.